Close your eyes for a second. I want you to transport yourself to the industrial heartland of Europe. Imagine you're the captain of industry, a CEO sitting in a corner office overlooking a massive manufacturing complex in the Ruhr Valley or Bavaria. For decades, this place has been the beating heart of the global economy. You're producing the high-grade steel that holds skyscrapers together. You're making the specialized chemicals that allow modern agriculture to exist. You are manufacturing the precision components that drive the entire automotive world. You are in Germany, a nation whose brand is practically a synonym for efficiency, reliability, and engineering prowess. But the year is 2024, and when you walk out onto the catwalks above the factory floor, something feels wrong. The rhythmic thrum of heavy machinery? Gone. The blast furnaces? Cold. The assembly lines? Motionless. You haven't halted production because the world stopped wanting your products. Your order books are actually full. You haven't shut down because your workforce, the most highly skilled guys in Europe, is on strike outside. No. You've shut down because the simple mathematics of survival don't work anymore. You are closed because the cost of literally just flipping the switch to turn the lights on exceeds the profit you can make from what you build. Welcome to the Energiewende, the energy transition. This was billed as the grandest infrastructure project since the reconstruction after World War II. It was supposed to be humanity's shining beacon, a transition into a green utopia powered by the wind and the sun, completely free from the guilt of carbon emissions. The German state has poured an estimated $500 billion into this project over the last 2 decades. It was meant to be a miracle. So, what is the return on this colossal investment? The report card is devastating. Germany now contends with the highest industrial electricity prices in the developed world. Its economy is actively de-industrializing, hollowing out from the inside. And here is the darkest, most biting irony of the entire saga. Just to keep the lights on during the winter, the nation that promised to lead the world in green energy is currently dismantling wind farms to expand open-pit coal mines. You literally cannot make this up. Today, we are going to perform a forensic autopsy on what might be the single most expensive unforced error in modern economic history. We are going to dissect how a lethal cocktail of political hubris, geopolitical blindness, and reactionary panic led an industrial superpower into a trap of its own design. Fasten your seatbelts. This isn't just a story about electricity. It's a story about how to break a country. To understand how Germany walked up to the edge of the cliff and decided to jump, we have to rewind the clock. We need to go back to 2010. It feels like a different geological era, doesn't it? Social media was in its infancy. The global economy was clawing its way back from the 2008 crash. And in Berlin, Chancellor Angela Merkel was at the absolute height of her power. Now, it is important to remember who Angela Merkel is. She isn't just a career politician. She is a scientist. She holds a doctorate in quantum chemistry. She understands physics. And in 2010, her government made a rational, data-driven decision. They passed legislation to extend the operational lifespan of Germany's nuclear power fleet. At that moment, Germany was in an enviable position. Their energy grid was the envy of the continent. They possessed a robust, diversified mix of power sources. Roughly a quarter of the nation's electricity came from nuclear reactors. These plants were fully amortized, meaning they were paid off, and they produced power that was carbon-free, incredibly stable, and dirt cheap. The strategy was sound. Use these reliable nuclear titans as a bridge, a stable foundation upon which to slowly build a renewable future over the next 30 or 40 years. Then, on March 11, 2011, the Pacific Ocean revolted. The Tohoku earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, unleashing a tsunami of biblical proportions that inundated the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. It was a human tragedy and a disaster of engineering. However, let's look at the geography here. Fukushima happened 5,500 miles away from Berlin. It happened in one of the most seismically active zones on the Ring of Fire. It involved a reactor design from the 1960s that was hit by a literal tidal wave. Germany, situated in the heart of the stable European tectonic plate, is not exactly known for its devastating tsunamis or megaquakes. Logic, the kind of logic you'd expect from a quantum chemist, would dictate a safety review. You check your flood walls, you inspect your backup diesel generators, you ensure your fail-safes are redundant. But politics is rarely about logic. It is about the raw current of public emotion. The German public was gripped by a primal fear. The anti-nuclear sentiment in Germany is a cultural phenomenon, deeply rooted in the psyche of the generation that watched Chernobyl unfold in the 1980s. For the Green Party, this was their messianic moment. They had been campaigning for this since day one. So, what did the scientist chancellor do? Did she pull out a calculator? Did she look at the base load requirements of the world's fourth largest economy? No, she looked at the polling numbers. In a desperate bid to save her political coalition in the face of upcoming state elections, Merkel executed one of the sharpest U-turns in political history. Days after the Japanese tsunami, she announced the Atomausstieg, the nuclear exit. Germany would forcibly shut down every single one of its nuclear reactors by 2022. 8 gigawatts of clean power were taken offline almost instantly. This decision is the original sin of the European energy crisis. To put this in perspective, let's use an analogy. Imagine you are living in a house in the middle of a freezing winter. You have a furnace in the basement. It's old, it looks a bit scary, but it works perfectly and keeps you warm. You decide you want to switch to solar panels. That's a noble goal. A rational person would install the panels, buy a battery, ensure the system works, and then decommission the furnace. Germany did the opposite. They went into the basement with a sledgehammer, smashed the furnace to pieces, and then looked up at the cloudy winter sky and said, "Don't worry, the sun is bound to come out eventually." They took 17 highly efficient, zero-carbon, profit-generating assets and threw them in the scrap heap. Why is this a $500 billion mistake? Because the economics of replacement are brutal. Building wind turbines is expensive, but building wind turbines to replace working nuclear plants is economic suicide. You aren't increasing your total energy capacity. You are spending billions just to run in place. You are burning capital to get back to zero. Between 2010 and the early 2000s, the German consumer subsidized this transition through the EEG levy, a surcharge on every kilowatt hour used by households and small businesses. Electricity prices in Germany soared to nearly 3 times the average in the United States. And here is the punchline that nobody finds funny. Despite this mountain of spending, despite the solar panels on every roof and the wind parks in the North Sea, Germany's carbon emissions barely budged for a decade. Why? Because of the intermittency problem. When the wind didn't blow and the sun didn't shine, a pretty common occurrence in Northern Europe, they couldn't turn the nuclear plants back on. They were gone. So they had to fire up the old coal plants. They burned lignite, brown coal, the wettest, dirtiest, most carbon-intensive fossil fuel known to man. They murdered the cleanest form of baseload power to save the environment, only to end up addicted to the sootiest rock in the ground. So you have smashed your nuclear capacity. You have built a lot of wind and solar, but they are fickle friends who only show up when the weather is nice. You need a backup plan for the Dunkelflaute, the German word for dark doldrums, those long periods with no sun and no wind. If you want to phase out coal, there is only one bridge fuel left: natural gas. It burns cleaner than coal. Gas turbines can spin up in minutes to balance the grid. And crucially, gas provides the immense industrial heat needed for chemistry and metallurgy. But Germany has a geology problem. It has very little gas of its own. It needed a dealer. Enter Vladimir Putin. For decades, German foreign policy was guided by a doctrine known as Wandel durch Handel, change through trade. The philosophy was incredibly optimistic, bordering on naive. The idea was that if Germany bought enough gas from Russia, if they entangled the Russian economy with the European West, then Moscow would inevitably evolve into a reliable partner, perhaps even a liberal democracy. The logic was, you don't go to war with your best customer. This philosophy birthed the Nord Stream pipelines. Nord Stream 1 and the ill-fated Nord Stream 2 were colossal engineering projects running under the Baltic Sea, designed to bypass Eastern Europe and pump cheap Siberian gas directly into the veins of German industry. It was a drug, and Germany was the addict. By 2021, Germany was importing a staggering 55% of its natural gas from Russia. The entire business model of giants like BASF, Bayer, Volkswagen, and Mercedes was predicated on one assumption: that cheap Russian hydrocarbons would flow forever. It wasn't that they weren't warned. They were warned constantly. The Polish government warned them. The Ukrainians screamed it. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, who understand Russian imperialism better than anyone, warned that this was a trap. They told Berlin, "You are handing the Kremlin a kill switch for your economy." And we cannot forget the most viral warning of them all. In 2018, at the United Nations General Assembly, then-President Donald Trump stood at the podium and said explicitly, "Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course." The camera cut to the German delegation. They weren't listening. They were smirking. They were nudging each other and laughing. The arrogance was palpable. Their expressions said, "Listen to this unsophisticated man. He doesn't understand the nuance of high-level European diplomacy." Fast forward to February 24th, 2022. Russian tanks crossed the border into Ukraine. The laughter in the German Foreign Ministry stopped instantly. Overnight, the change through trade policy stopped looking like sophisticated diplomacy and started looking like suicidal negligence. When the sanctions regime hit and Russia began to throttle the gas flows, followed by the mysterious underwater explosions that destroyed the pipelines, Germany was caught completely exposed. It was an economic blizzard, and they had no coat. The price of natural gas didn't just rise, it went vertical. On the spot market, prices spiked by over 1,000% at the peak. Think back to that factory owner from the introduction. Suddenly, his monthly energy bill went from 1 million euros to 10 million euros. There is no efficiency measure in the world that can absorb that shock. You cannot pass that cost on to customers because they can simply buy their steel or chemicals from China or the United States, where energy prices remain stable. The German government had to scramble in a panic. They were forced to nationalize the utility giant Uniper to the tune of 30 billion euros just to prevent the grid from collapsing. They had to earmark hundreds of billions more to subsidize energy bills to prevent civil unrest. This is where the trap snapped shut. Germany had killed its nuclear option. It had ideologically alienated itself from domestic fracking, and its primary supplier of the one fuel it desperately needed had just become an enemy of the state. The Green Party economic minister, Robert Habeck, had to embark on a humiliation tour. He was photographed bowing to the emirs of Qatar, begging for liquefied natural gas, LNG, to replace the cheap Russian pipeline gas. Here is the economic reality. LNG is inherently more expensive. It has to be cooled to minus 162 degrees Celsius, loaded onto a specialized tanker, shipped halfway across the world, and then regasified. The era of cheap German manufacturing energy is likely gone forever. The competitive advantage that made Made in Germany a global powerhouse, high quality at a competitive price, was secretly subsidized by cheap Russian gas. Now that the subsidy is gone, the cracks in the foundation are turning into canyons. If you want to see the visceral cost of this energy trap, don't look at a chart. Look at the city of Ludwigshafen. This is a company town, the headquarters of BASF, the largest chemical producer on the planet. This single industrial site consumes roughly as much natural gas annually as the entire country of Switzerland. For over a century, this was the engine room of German wealth, turning raw hydrocarbons into the fertilizers that feed the world, the plastics in your car, and the vitamins in your pantry. But in 2023, the engine began to sputter. BASF announced a permanent downsizing of its European operations. They slashed 2,600 jobs at their flagship plant. They shut down one of their ammonia production facilities. And here is the critical part. They aren't just closing down, they are moving. BASF is currently constructing a massive 10 billion euro state-of-the-art complex in Zhanjiang, China. Why? The CEO, Martin Brudermüller, was blunt. He stated that Europe is becoming increasingly uncompetitive. That is corporate speak for, "We are leaving before the ship sinks." In China, the energy is cheap, the supply chains are robust, and the government prioritizes industrial output over ideological purity. They are not alone. It is a mass exodus. Miele, the manufacturer of those legendary, indestructible washing machines, announced they are moving significant production lines to Poland. Volkswagen is openly prioritizing battery factories in Canada and the United States, chasing the lucrative subsidies of the Inflation Reduction Act and the stability of North American energy prices. Economists use a polite, sanitized term for this: structural change. I will give you the accurate term: deindustrialization. Think about the implications of this. Germany is an export economy. It doesn't rely on finance like the UK or tech services like the US. Germany makes things. Real, tangible objects. If you strip away the ability to manufacture competitively, what is left? A very picturesque museum with excellent beer and castles. This isn't just about shareholders losing a few points on their stock portfolio. This is about the disintegration of the social contract. These were the high-paying, middle-class union jobs that underpinned German social stability. When a steel mill closes, it doesn't come back in a few years. When a chemical plant moves to China, the intellectual property and the supply chain ecosystem go with it. Germany is literally hollowing itself out to meet carbon targets that the rest of the industrialized world is treating as suggestions. It is akin to burning down your own house to demonstrate to your neighbors how committed you are to fire safety. Let's get technical for a moment, because the devil is in the engineering details, and this is where the incompetence truly shines. Germany has a fundamental geography problem regarding its renewable energy. The wind blows in the north, near the stormy coasts of the North Sea, but the factories, the power-hungry giants like BMW, Audi, and Siemens, are in the south, in Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg. To get the power from point A, the windy north, to point B, the industrial south, you need massive infrastructure, high-voltage transmission superhighways. The flagship project for this is called SuedLink. It was supposed to be the aorta of the energy transition. The original plan was to have these transmission lines ready by 2022, timed perfectly to replace the nuclear plants being switched off in the south. The reality? The project is stuck in bureaucratic purgatory. Due to endless lawsuits and NIMBY, not in my backyard, protests from local communities who didn't want pylons ruining their view, the government capitulated. They agreed to bury the cables underground. This decision tripled the cost and added years of engineering delays. The new estimated completion date is 2028, and even that is optimistic. So we have a ludicrous situation today. Imagine a stormy day in the North Sea. The wind turbines are spinning furiously, generating gigawatts of clean power. But there is no wire big enough to send that power to the factories in the south. The grid becomes congested. To prevent the local grid from overloading and blowing up, the grid operators have to order the wind farms to shut down. They feather the blades and stop the turbines. But here is the kicker. The wind farm owners have contracts. They get paid whether they produce power or not. This is called redispatch, or as I call it, ghost electricity. German consumers are paying wind farms billions of euros to not produce electricity. In 2022 alone, the cost of this grid congestion management hit a record 4.2 billion euros. Let that sink in. You are paying for turbines to sit idle in the north. Meanwhile, because that clean power can't reach the south, the factories in Bavaria have to fire up local gas and coal plants to keep the assembly lines moving. You are paying twice, once for the green energy you didn't get, and once for the dirty energy you had to use instead. It is a Rube Goldberg machine of economic inefficiency. And who foots the bill? The German grandmother opening her mailbox to find an electricity bill that has doubled in 3 years. By 2023, the German government realized that shutting down nuclear and burning coal wasn't exactly helping their carbon footprint. They needed a win. They needed to find carbon savings elsewhere. They looked at the residential sector. Enter the Heizungsgesetz, the heating law. The Green Party pushed through legislation that effectively amounted to a ban on new oil and gas boilers starting in 2024. The mandated replacement? Heat pumps. Now, let's be clear. Heat pumps are a miraculous technology. They are thermodynamics essentially working as magic, air conditioners running in reverse. In a modern, airtight home, they are incredibly efficient. But there is a catch: physics. Heat pumps work best in homes with high-grade insulation and underfloor heating, which allows for low-flow temperatures. Do you know what the German housing stock looks like? It consists of millions of post-war buildings constructed with thick bricks, drafty windows, and old-school, high-temperature radiators. To make a heat pump work efficiently in a 1950s unrenovated house, you can't just swap the box in the basement. You often need to rip up the floors, replace the plumbing, and wrap the house in insulation. The total cost for a homeowner? It can easily range between 20,000 euros and 50,000 euros. The government offered subsidies, yes, but the communication was catastrophic. It felt like a forced expropriation of wealth. Middle-class families and pensioners, people who had paid off their mortgages and thought they were secure, were suddenly told they might have to take out five-figure loans just to stay warm next winter. The public reaction wasn't just anger, it was fury. The tabloid giant Bild ran headlines calling it Habeck's heat hammer. The approval ratings for the ruling coalition fell off a cliff. The far-right party, the AfD, Alternative for Germany, surged in the polls to second place, largely by campaigning on a simple platform: "We won't touch your boiler." It got so bad the government nearly collapsed. They had to water down the law significantly, delaying deadlines and creating loopholes, but the damage was done. The heat pump industry, which had invested millions ramping up production expecting a government-mandated boom, actually saw sales crash in 2024. Why? Because the public was confused and terrified. They panic-bought brand-new gas boilers in record numbers before the ban could kick in, effectively locking in fossil fuel usage for another 20 years. It was a masterclass in how not to design policy. Instead of incentivizing the transition, they tried to mandate it overnight, completely ignoring the economic reality of their own citizens. Now, if you confront a German government official with all of this, they will point to one statistic. They will say, "But wait, our emissions are dropping. We hit our climate targets for 2023. And technically, they are right. In 2023, Germany's CO2 emissions dropped to their lowest levels in 70 years. Success, right? Wrong. You have to ask why they dropped. Was it because of the efficiency of the wind turbines? Was it the heat pumps? No. The emissions dropped because the factories stopped running. Energy-intensive production fell by nearly 20%. When you shut down steel mills, close chemical plants, and bankrupt paper factories, your industrial emissions go down. Hooray! You have saved the planet by destroying your economy. This is the equivalent of a doctor telling you that you've successfully lost 50 pounds, but failing to mention it's because he amputated your leg. Yes, the scale says you are lighter, but you are bleeding out on the floor. The head of Germany's Federal Audit Office explicitly called this out. He stated that Germany is not on track for a sustainable transition. It is on track for an economic contraction masquerading as climate success. And it gets worse. Because Germany shut down its nuclear plants, its electricity grid is now significantly dirtier than its neighbor, France. France generates about 70% of its power from nuclear. Their carbon intensity is often around 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Germany? Even on a good day, it hovers between 300 and 400 grams. So, when a virtuous German consumer buys an electric car to save the planet, they are charging it with electricity that is 6 to 8 times dirtier than the electricity a French person uses. The self-proclaimed green energy leader of Europe is actually one of its biggest polluters, simply because they refuse to accept the scientific reality that nuclear energy is zero carbon. So here we are. It is late 2025. The German economy is stagnating. It was the only major G7 economy to shrink in 2023, and growth has been anemic since. The German model, cheap energy in, high-quality exports out, is broken. The political landscape is fractured. The Green Party is fighting for its political survival. The industries that built German wealth are looking for exit strategies. And the rest of the world is watching. Developing nations like India, Vietnam, and Indonesia are looking at the German experiment and saying, yeah, we are definitely not doing that. They are building coal. They are building nuclear. They are prioritizing reliability and affordability over ideology. Germany wanted to be a role model for the world, and in a way, they succeeded. They became the perfect anti-model. They became the cautionary tale. They demonstrated to the world that you cannot run a modern industrial economy solely on intermittent, weather-dependent energy sources, at least not without a massive, reliable baseload backup. And if you destroy your clean backup, nuclear, before your new technology, batteries or hydrogen, is ready, you don't cross the bridge, you fall off it. Energy policy is governed by an iron triangle: reliability, affordability, and sustainability. You need all three to balance. Germany pursued sustainability with religious zeal, but they sacrificed reliability and affordability on the altar of ideology. Is there a way out? Maybe. Germany still possesses incredible engineers and deep financial reserves. There is quiet talk in the opposition parties of restarting the remaining nuclear plants, though the technical and legal hurdles are immense. There is hope that hydrogen infrastructure will eventually mature. But the lesson for the rest of the world is crystal clear. Energy policy cannot be built on wishful thinking. It requires physics, mathematics, and cold, hard economics. If you let ideology drive the bus, do not be surprised when you drive it off a cliff. Germany spent $500 billion to learn this painful lesson. Hopefully, the rest of the world can learn it for free. If you found this deep dive valuable, please check out our upcoming video where I break down why France is currently winning the energy war. It is the perfect sequel to this disaster story. Smash that subscribe button. It helps the algorithm, and it helps me afford my own electricity bill. Let me know in the comments, do you think Germany can turn this around? Or is the era of German industrial dominance over? I read every comment. See you in the next one.